Alright, hopefully cameras are figured out, audio is figured out. This is a 300 blackout AR-15. It is what I consider to be a general purpose 300 blackout build. It does pretty much everything that you would ask of a 300 blackout, which is kind of different from 5.56. So what is a general purpose rifle? We'll probably do this also just as an introduction to various calibers. For some of the new people maybe looking to build their first AR-15 or their first 300 blackout AR-15. So typically most AR-15s can be chambered in 5.56. What general purpose typically means is everything that you ask a 5.56 to do, this can do most of it pretty well. This is a 14.7 inch with a flash hider pinned and welded. It does have a flashlight with a pressure switch mounted on top, and an M-lock rail which extends almost the way out, and a 1:8 optic with ballistic drop compensation in the reticle, which just means if you're shooting out at 400 yards, there is a reticle which you can help range targets and shoot them at distance. Being a 1:8 on a 14.7, it's pretty easy to get first round hits out to 300-400 yards, maybe even further than that, 500 and 600. Then you start getting, where you might have to take a few shots, see where they're landing kind of thing, use the reticle to adjust. But this pretty much does everything 5.56 is asked to do. You've got from the longest builds, 18 and 20 inch, precision rifles where people are using them for competition, for hunting and whatnot. Then you've got 10.3 inch barrels with, Daniel Defense Mark 18s or Colt FN, like military-esque clones that people are asking to be really good truck guns, home defense, running them suppressed kind of thing. So this lies somewhere in the middle. 5.56 was initially designed to kind of replace 308 in a military setting, not in terms of like replicating its performance, but at least mimicking what it does ballistically while being able to carry a whole lot more ammo. With that, you kind of need velocity. 5.56 is a very small, it's a 22 caliber bullet. And in order to fragment, you need about 2,500 feet per second. And if you really want it to break up well and wreak some havoc on a soft tissue target, you need about 2,700 feet per second to get that consistent, substantial fragmentation in order to get it to really mimic what a 308 is capable of. Not replicating, but mimicking. So 14.7, you can expect 3,000 feet per second with this. Not a whole lot of drop out to 300, especially with a 36 yard zero. Pretty much at 200, 220, you might be high about 8, 9, 10 inches, and then it returns back to zero around 350. It's pretty much point of aim, point of impact out to 300. If you do go with an optic like this, you might zero it at 100, and then you've got reticles to help you do your holdovers at 2, 3, 4, 500, all the way out to, I believe, 800. So this does pretty much everything. It'll fit in, a vehicle. It'll extend out. If you throw a bipod on it, you can, use it to shoot at range. It's a very stable platform. It's not all that heavy. You can carry a whole bunch of ammo. You could easily use this for home defense, and you could also use it to go prairie dog hunting. So it does pretty much everything that 5.56 is asked to do. A little more of a military backing to the round. So typically this is going to be more of a fighting rifle. So let's get into 300 blackout and why it's so different. So 300 blackout was designed with military intent in mind. Kevin from Q and AAC before that, a few companies that he's been parts of, they were basically, his company was tasked with finding a caliber which you could load supersonics and shoot a longer barrel and more or less replicate what a AK is capable of doing. Like a 123 grain projectile going 2,400 feet per second or 2,350, somewhere in there. With 300 blackout, you can expect some of the supersonics to get about 2,350 or 2,400 feet per second with the 110 and 120 grains. And then they also wanted it to outperform the MP5 and other pistol caliber carbines with 9mm. So typically with that, you see a 115 or 124 grain pill, maybe in a ported barrel so that it stays subsonic. So you'll see 115 and 124 grains going about 1,000 feet per second. Some civilian options, people will just run 147 grain going about 1,000 feet per second. But in a 300 blackout, you're going to get a much longer, much heavier pill. It's going to be 220 grains, so nearly double the weight of 9mm, if not double the weight. Doing the same velocity, about 1,000 feet per second. This particular one with 220s, I'm getting 989 feet per second through a chrono, so pretty good. The supersonics in a short barrel like this, you're still getting really good performance in a 300 blackout. It is a shorter case than what the AK would use, 7.62 by 39. The 300 Blackout is 7.62 by 35, so the case is 4 millimeters shorter, so a little less case capacity, but it's still a 30 caliber projectile. They're about the same in diameter. And in an 8-inch barrel with those fast-burning powders, I'm still getting 2,156 feet per second average with those 110 grain supersonic loadings. So compared to even a full length, this Hornady 110 grain, it's only rated for 2375 out of a full length barrel, which is presumably a 16-inch and 300 Blackout. So really, you're only losing 220 feet per second when you chop 8 inches of barrel. So even with this suppressor, this comes out to 15 inches for the barrel length. So add an inch, and that's what you would have to add in order to get another 220 feet per second. So 300 Blackout really excels in these shorter barrel lengths. I think that's a major point of contention for people, is what barrel length to go with for 300 Blackout. Especially if you scroll Reddit or TaxSwap, whatever, people selling uppers or people asking about uppers and barrels. People will take a hit and sell a 9-inch upper to go with a 8-inch upper, an 8.2 inch, just to change that little bit, and they'll change their handguard setup. They'll change everything to get just a slightly different measurement. And ultimately, I don't really think it matters all that much. You do get more performance out of a longer barrel. If you want to go with an 11.5 or 12.5, you do get more performance. If you want to go as short as a 5.5 inch, I've got a 6-inch upper here that I've been doing some testing with through the chrono and whatnot. This same loading, 110 grain from Hornady, you're still getting 2,038 feet per second. So it's only a 300 feet per second loss from a 16-inch barrel to a 6-inch. You're still getting really good performance. Now, velocity is not the only drawback. You're also going to have more concussion, more recoil. You're probably going to be a little more temperamental with the gas. But proprietary builds like the Sig Rattler, more than reliable. So really, whatever length you want to go with it. There's drawbacks to each. If you go with a longer barrel, it is going to be heavier. It's going to fit in less bags. If you go shorter, you are going to get that much less velocity. You're going to get a little bit more recoil. If you suppress it, you're probably going to get even more gas in your face. And it's going to be a little more temperamental between supers and subs and whatnot. Something like this in an intermediate, like an 8-9-inch barrel, you're going to have good all day. So let's talk tip to butt about some considerations for 300 Blackout. Starting with, it's probably going to need to be suppressed. Not in terms of like you're going to need it for reliability, but if you want a general purpose 300 Blackout that you can truly do everything with, those Subsonics are designed to run with a suppressor. Now, I've tested in this upper. They function fine without it, but there's no point in running Subsonics if they're not going to be quiet. I'm not going to make any recommendations on what suppressor you do get, because that's another huge point of contention, is what suppressor to go with. This one is a Black Hawk gas can. It's just a licensed copy of the Silencer Co. Omega 300. I got a buddy who's got the same suppressor. They function the same. They use the same QD mounts. They're the same length, with the exception of that Omega 300 has those weird, almost like muzzle brake like ports at the front outside of the suppressor, which makes it a little longer. But this one comes to about 7 inches. Like I said, with an 8-inch barrel, this comes to about 15 inches. So this is still about the size of an M4 carbine, even when it's suppressed, with a 7-inch handguard. So it's about the same as an M4 carbine. Everything feels familiar. If you've done any sort of military training, or you've shot a basic Smith & Wesson M&P Sport 2, this will feel very, very familiar. Nice lightweight M-lock. But like I said, you're probably going to want a suppressor. Even the supers in these are very much hearing safe. These 110 grains, I've seen people do testing where they're coming out at about 130, 131 decibels with supersonics through a good suppressor in these, medium length barrels. And partially that's just because 300 Blackout, you're getting faster powder burn, so there's less explosion going on beyond the barrel. Whereas a 5.56, if you go with something like a 10.5, those powders aren't being burned until 18, 20, 22 inches. So you get quite the fireball out the front. 300 Blackout, that's less of a concern. Supersonics are going slower. They're not going Mach 3 or anything crazy. They're going, 2,100, 2,200 feet per second, maybe 2,400 in a full-length barrel. But even then, you get more powder burn, so less pop muzzle. So you're going to want a suppressor. You can get, something as compact as like a 5-inch suppressor, 4.8 inch, somewhere in there. That would end more around here. You can get even longer, go with an 8-inch suppressor. Whole bunch of volume. The more volume you have, generally speaking, the quieter the suppressor is going to be. But the heavier it's going to be, the longer it's going to be, the less bags it's going to fit in. You can go with direct thread. In 300 Blackout, I like having quick detach just because it is such a short platform. If I were to put a folder on this and want to put it in a backpack, I like being able to take that suppressor off really quick. You know, something like the Surefire dead air ratcheting systems are very, very fast. The Silence Crit ASR, not quite as fast, but I still like the lockup. It's not all that heavy. You know, adding a suppressor like this adds, you know, maybe a pound to the front of your rifle, which is just making up for the short barrel length. So get a suppressor. As far as muzzle device, I like using a flash hider. If you're going to run it suppressed all the time, you can go with a muzzle brake, just to kind of act as that sacrificial baffle where the port on the muzzle brake actually slows down some of the gases. I don't know all the science behind that. I've heard some people complain that if you use a muzzle brake, you're increasing the pressure on the sides of the can. I can see that being true, but most suppressors are going to outlive your rifle anyways, so it's not too big of a concern. I like flash hiders because if I do shoot it without a suppressor, like in a bag gun format, it's not going to be as concussive. It's not going to have as big of a fireball. It's going to reduce that flash, and you know, it's still not that harsh of a recoiling, so I don't think you need a muzzle brake or compensator. So I like flash hiders, but I understand if, you know, some people want to go with a muzzle brake to kind of act as that sacrificial baffle and hopefully save, you know, some life in their suppressor. So after that, let's go ahead and talk with your barrel length. So like I said, a 6-inch, you know, you can get about 2,040 feet per second with those, you know, 110 grain, which is about the lowest that you'll see out of this. There might be some copper loadings I'm unaware of, but generally speaking, 110 from Hornady or Barnes are the most common supersonic, like defensive loadings and hunting loadings. So 2,040 feet per second is still very fast. That's still twice as fast as you're going to get with a pistol caliber in, you know, the same length barrel. And it's 110 grain. It's cooking. It's a 308 varmint projectile. That's, you know, typically what you see with the supersonic loadings in these. 8-inch barrel, you know, you gain 110 feet per second, which is, you know, it's significant. I wouldn't say it's substantial, but it's significant. It's definitely, you know, worth considering, especially if you do have a folder on your lower. Then an 8-inch barrel still fits in any, you know, 19 or 20-inch backpack, which is about, you know, the standard backpack, like in a laptop pocket or something like that. If you were to put a folder, it still meets that requirement. You can go up to about a 9 or 10.5-inch barrel, depending on your muzzle device, and still get it to fit in most backpacks. So if this is a bag gun, 10.5 is going to be about your limit for common backpacks. You can go with more of the, Vertex style backpacks that are a little taller and probably get away with an 11.5, 12.5. But you're adding a little more weight, and like I said, you're not really getting all that much velocity once you get past that, you know, 6, 7, 8, 9-inch barrel. 300 blackout, you're not getting all that much velocity. So I like sticking intermediate. I think a good general purpose AR-15 build, I'd probably be looking 7.5 to 10.5. If you want to go shorter with that, I'd probably get a factory built upper, something like the MCX Rattler or something like a Maxim PDW or Daniel Defense, I believe, has like a 6-inch barrel. And that's just because I've had no issues running supersonics, but I know some people have reported with subsonics and stuff, a 6-inch barrel in an AR-15, it's just very difficult to get enough gas back to reliably work both supersonics and subsonics, suppressed and unsuppressed. So I think about 7.5 to 10.5 is a great range for a general purpose 300 blackout. And that's because you're asking it to be a bag gun. You know, some people are asking it to go hunting, for home defense, truck guns, stuff like that. So you really want to prioritize that kind of compactness. And if you're using it for hunting, all I do is I just limit myself basically to bow stands, you know, 30, 40, 50 yards using supersonic loadings. There are some sort of subsonic loadings, but we'll talk about that. So barrel length. Now, if you were dead set on using subsonics for home defense, you know, I'm not a big fan of subsonics for home defense. Not that I don't think they'll work. I mean, pistol calibers work for home defense. You know, plenty of people have defended their homes with Glock 19s and whatnot, whether by threat of use or by using it actually. You know, I've seen a few justified homicides using just handguns. So I think subsonics will work even if they don't expand. I would prefer them to expand, and there are options. You know, you get some of the Underwood and discrete ballistics, sort of like controlled fracturing rounds. If you are dead set on using subsonics, the most important thing with that in a short barrel is barrel twist. I would advise you to go watch Military Arms Channel. Actually did a video comparing a 9-inch BCM to a 5.5-inch, the SIG Rattler. And the 9-inch had a 1 in 7 twist, and the 5.5-inch had a 1 in 5 twist. So twist rate is just how fast the rifling and the grooves in the barrel are twisting. So you get, you know, 1 full rotation per 5 inches compared to 1 full rotation per 7 inches. And what that does is it just stabilizes the round like a football. So, 1 in 7. Typically, when you get a lighter bullet that's going faster, you need a more shallow twist rate. So something like 1 in 7 for these 110 grains is awesome. When you go heavier, something like the 220 grain Subsonics, 1 in 7 is still steep enough to stabilize it. 1 in 5 can help if you're using a very short barrel, just to make sure that bullet engages those grooves and goes, adds that little extra RPM to stabilize it. So if you watch that military arms channel video, what you'll see is the 1 in 7 twist and the longer barrel. Obviously, just with the longer barrel, you're going to get more velocity. Those Supersonics were a bit more damaging to watermelon, which is just something he used to kind of simulate lung tissue. Your lungs are something like 80% water, watermelon something like 90%. It's by no means like a scientific representation, but it is something just to show you sort of hydrostatic shock and what a supersonic round can do. So that 9-inch was obviously outperforming a 5.5-inch barrel. It's got more velocity. It's going to create more hydrostatic shock. But when you get down to those low velocities, hydrostatic shock's not as big of a factor, mostly because water doesn't compress. So when you hit it with very high velocities and that water tries to compress, instead of the water compressing, it just destroys soft tissue. When you get down to 1,000 feet per second in those subsonic loadings, you're really going to have to depend on yaw and controlled fracturing. So yaw is just the bullet tumbling. So when you have a long bullet and the mass is very heavy towards the back, as soon as it hits and that back wants to just fly, end over end, that's going to create a lot of tissue damage, or controlled fracturing. So if you just have a bullet that's pre-cut, it's where when it hits, it's going to open up and create a nice flower petal. It's another way of creating soft tissue damage with subsonic loading. So with that, while the 9-inch did better with Supersonics, that higher twist rate with the 5.5-inch barrel, these Subsonics were actually doing more damage to the watermelons with the shorter barrel and faster twist rate. And this is a relatively new concept. If you look into the 8.6 blackout, which people are testing out of new shorter barrels, there's actually some pretty good studies that are showing that the RPM on that bullet, so if you have a faster twist rate, that bullet's going to be spinning faster, where that kind of translates into a more damaging yaw when it hits the target. So I can't explain it. Basically, just imagine if you had a spinner and you're spinning at 500 RPM or something like that, just to throw a number at it, and you just flick it off course, which is basically destabilizing it when it hits tissue, and it'll flop around the desk or whatever. And then imagine if you took a Beyblade thing and you just did it as fast as it could, and that same top, although it's got the same energy going forward, like you'd have 1,000 feet per second in subsonics regardless. If you're spinning it as fast as you can, even though it's got the same force going forward, that sort of rotational energy, when you destabilize it and knock it off course, the faster it's spinning, the more it's just going to go crazy. If you were to have 2 Beyblades in a shoebox, God, I'm really showing my age with this one. Yeah. But if you had 2 Beyblades in a box, generally speaking, the one that's going faster is going to do more damage to the one that's going slower. So if... I can't believe I just used Beyblades as an example. But if you're going to use subsonics, it's very intriguing to look at those faster twist rates. Now what you get with that is your supersonics are also going to have more twist rate, which could potentially destabilize the round because it's a lighter pill and you might overstabilize it in a way. Too many RPMs could actually kind of make it wobble throughout the air. Now those 5.5-inch rattlers, I've seen plenty of people still hitting steel out to 250 yards, 300 yards, still getting center mass hits just with a little red dot. So I don't have too big of a concern. And ultimately I think that's because at the lower velocity, 1,900, 2,000 feet per second with those supersonics, the RPM is not all that high. Whereas if you were to have a 1 in 5 twist and a 16-inch barrel going 2,400 feet per second, it's rotating that much faster. So then I could potentially see there being some destabilization issues. So if you're going to go with an ultra short barrel, it might be worth looking into a 1 in 5 twist. If you're going to go with a 9, 10-inch barrel, something like that, something like 1 in 7 might benefit you. But it'd still be worth looking into if other people have done it before, what their experiences with the twist rates are. So that's just one thing to consider. Your barrel profile with 300 blackouts can be a little thicker with 5.5 than 5.56, and that's just because your bore is 50% larger in this. So although you're shooting typically a lower pressure round that's not going to heat up as much as 5.56, just because the bore is so much bigger, you're going to see bigger profiles. So if you can't find your M4 profile 300 blackout, don't worry about it. You know, a medium profile or even like a sort of medium contour, like a heavy barrel, something like that's going to do just fine. This is a relatively lightweight profile for 300 blackout. I would consider it a medium contour barrel. I've had no issues with stringing rounds. Granted, I haven't done like mag dumps through this, but you know, I've done a few drills and had no issues with it stringing rounds. It still holds pretty good groupings. I'm shooting this through a red dot, so I'm not trying to get like 1 MOA or anything like that. But you know, anything 7.5 to 10.5 inch, medium contour. You know, if you get like a nitride finish, something that'll clean up easy, put a flash hider and a suppressor on it, that'll be a pretty reliable setup. Now your handguard and your weapon light and just kind of managing things, just keep in mind if you are going to run it suppressed most of the time, you are going to have a lot of suppressor shadow. So if your light is all the way back here, that suppressor is going to nearly eat into your hotspot. And when that's a big deal is mostly, you know, if you're, you know, trying not to aim your rifle directly at someone to determine if they're a threat, you know, that bump in the night kind of thing, you might want to shine it at their feet, kind of use the spill to determine what's in their hands, are they a threat or whatnot, and then choose to engage. So as you can see here, you know, there is a little bit of suppressor shadow with the light being as far back as it is. But if it were even further back, that suppressor shadow would be god-awful. And I did have this for a while without that cantilever mount. And so the head of my light was back about, you know, 2 or 3 inches further. Suppressor shadow was very distracting. If you're trying to see multiple targets, you're trying to see what's in somebody's hands while you're, you know, red dot on threat, it can be a little difficult. So I would recommend a cantilever. Now, where that comes in as a downside is if you're trying to do a bag gun, this sticks out about, you know, 1.5 to 2 inches further than my muzzle. So while this could potentially still fit as a bag gun, it might need a 20 or 21 inch tall backpack to still fit in the laptop compartment once folded. And I still need to get a folder for this. Pressure pad, I just like to run mine on top, mostly because if I did do a tail cap pressable, I would have to move it to this left side, which one is eating into my hand space. I'm already pretty limited with a 7-inch rail running a pressure switch and whatnot. But if I move the tail cap over, then my thumb is going to have to stay up near the suppressor. It's going to be a lot of heat after you fired a few rounds, and I just don't like all that heat being near my thumb. I don't like potentially touching the base of the suppressor. And I just like pressure pads. I run them on multiple rifles. It's very convenient. I don't have to change my grip at all. The only thing I do is just squeeze down with my thumb, and I've got a light. You could do, you know, if this was a backpack gun, you're not going to run it with a suppressor. You could just do a more like the Streamlight RM1 or like the Enforced Weapon Light with the sort of press down tail cap, not the press forward. Something like that on an ultra compact just kind of makes sense. With the gas system, 300 blackout, like I said, it's going to be lower pressure rounds than 5.56, so you're typically going to see a pistol gas length. If you go something shorter, like a 5.5 inch, it's typically going to be a proprietary system. You know, something like a short, like a piston, or you would just see a even shorter gas length. This one's a pistol length, so gas tube comes to about here. I believe the port is right here, so you've still got a little bit of dwell time going on. With that, I've had no issues running 110, 120, 150, 147 grain, 220, 208s, and I've tested all those subsonics and supersonics, with the exception of I don't think I've tested 120s subsonic, just because I haven't shot those all that much, but I've not had a single malfunction running any pressure round, you know, subsonic, supersonics, various weights. No issues. Like I said, if you go with something short, you're probably going to have to go with something proprietary. Either follow someone else's build or buy factory at that point. Why I went with M-LOK, it just seems to be the standard these days. If you are going to try to run a cantilever mount, I would get a mount that's designed to be a cantilever. This is the Arasaka Inline. It is not designed to be cantilever, so I do have where when I mount my suppressor, it slightly touches the mount. I haven't had any issues with that causing stringing of rounds. It hasn't caused any issues with heat transfer from the suppressor to the light. But just with this being such a slim M-LOK handguard, it does cause that rubbing. Now, if you go with an oversized handguard, you won't have those issues. If you go with Picatinny and then do, you know, cantilever mount off that, you shouldn't have any issues. Or if you get a cantilever specific mount that also kind of increases the space from the suppressor to the light, you won't have any issues. So just keep that in mind. I might upgrade that in the future, but honestly, I haven't had any issues. Some slight issues. It doesn't really touch the ratcheting system, but it does touch the body of this little suppressor right here, so just something to consider. Receivers don't really matter all that much, so I'm not really going to talk about it. These are AR Precision, and as you can tell, this is not my long-term plan based on the mismatched receivers, but it's what I'm running right now. Why I went with red dot and fixed irons, I had the fixed irons laying around. I also think they look good. I like the idea that if my red dot, for some reason the shake await doesn't work, which I don't know if I've ever had that, maybe once with this Romeo 5 where it didn't wake up, and even then I think it's just because from where I was holding it to how slow I brought it to my eyes, I don't think it just had enough rattle to shake it awake. So you could go with a fixed 2 times or something from Primary Arms. You could go with a 1 to 6, and it'd probably be a little better in those hunting applications, especially if you're still trying to do some sort of spotting. You're still trying to see, hey, how many antlers does it have, that kind of thing, at 200 yards as it walks closer towards you. But I'm not going to take a shot at those distances, and most of the time that I'm in a hunting situation, I'm going to have something like this little 8-time monocular for identification. So I don't really need it on my rifle. This is also a lot lighter than a 1 to 6 or 1 to 8. I believe this is like 4 ounces. So I can just carry that. I do think it would be a good setup to run this with a magnifier. So here I have the Juliet 3 micro little magnifier. Almost fits there even with the fixed irons. Magnifiers are great. This is a little heavier even than the 8-time monocular. It does give you that little bit much more precision when shooting with a red dot. You can just dial your brightness down, throw your magnifier in front, use it to take that precise shot. But that's just not what I'm asking 300 blackout to do. That's what I have something like this for with a 1 to 8 and a 14 7-inch barrel. I'm going to get more velocity. I can use those heavy OTM bullets. I can use this to take deer out to 200 yards, and I have, and it's very functional. So as far as the purposes of what 300 blackout's being asked to do, I think hunting out to 200 yards is probably the least important of which. There's other calibers for that are better. If you do want just a hunting build, a 16-inch 300 blackout with a 1 to 6, an amazing rifle. But I think if you're going for general purpose 300 blackout, you're trying to take advantage of that short barrel and still getting good ballistics. So I think something like a red dot is more than capable at bow range, 30, 40, 50, maybe even 60 yards using those Supersonics. Potentially even closer with Subsonics if you insist on hunting with Subsonics. It's not something I do, but I've seen people do it with, to good success. Let's see. I think we've talked enough about ammo and loading. 110, 120 for self-defense, for hunting and whatnot. 220s, 208s are fun for subsonic. If you're trying to kill Nutra, or I've got moles in my yard, so I think I might just sit on my roof one night with my white light, maybe a case of Topo Chico, and try to get some. Weapon light sights. Bolt carrier group. So inside the receiver, your bolt carrier group. As you can see, I'm running a nickel boron. This one's from WMD just because that's what was in stock. I do a lot of Toolcraft nickel borons, or nitride stuff. I've yet to try their nickel boron, but really any slick sort of coating that you can get that's still going to stay on there with high temperatures. So nickel boron and nitride are my go-tos for 300 blackout. They're just a little easier to clean than phosphate. Just get them, from a quality company, and it's really nothing to think about. Even when it's dry, like right now, there's no oil on my fingers after doing that, but when I rub it on the bolt carrier group like this, it feels like it's oiled. It's just that slick. So even when it's dry, it's just going to run great. Charging handle. Running it suppressed most of the time, you're probably going to get quite a bit of gas back in the face, depending on how that gas port, what the size is of that gas port, as well as like barrel length, what suppressor you're running, how much back pressure does that give you. With this one, I am running a Strike Industries charging handle. I know most things Strike Industries are very cringe. I despise red and blue anodized stuff, with the exception of like maybe some of the red lettering, like Safe Fire, that kind of stuff. With the exception of that, I like most things to just be like black or tan, olive drab, ranger green, whatever. Just like basic black or earth colored things. I'm just a simple person. But Strike Industries, this extended charging handle is excellent. I've compared this to my BCM charging handles. I've had friends who are more capable than me compare this to their and my BCM charging handles. Haven't compared it like a Radian or anything, but for like 28 bucks, these extended charging handles are amazing. And they have a pretty good shelf at the back too, so they're not quite like a gas buster AR that's like perfectly sealed at the end to completely like prevent gas from coming back in your eyes. But you know, strings of fire, you know, 2 rounds on a target, 5 rounds, 10 rounds, whatever. You can still shoot it pretty comfortably without that gas coming back and burning all your eyes. I have fired, you know, 5.56 short-barreled rifles that were unsuppressed that gave me just as much gas as this one does suppressed with certain loadings. You know, lower pressure rounds with a lot of back pressure in a short rifle, you're going to get gas back in the eyes. It's just going to happen. So look into a good gas buster charging handle or one that people have used on similar builds, you know, with good reviews, and they're saying, hey, this one really does block out a lot of it, at least with, you know, this arrow receiver or this Radian receiver or whatnot. That's just a thing to look at for your 300 blackout build. Trigger, get one that you like. This one's a single stage. You know, I typically prefer 2 stages. I was just trying something different. I think this is like a Rise, like 3.5 pound single trigger, single stage trigger. Yeah, it breaks pretty clean. I've enjoyed it so far. With your buffer, I'm currently running an H2, and partially that's because this is the LWRCI UCIW. A lot of letters, but this is their shortened buffer tube. Don't ask me about the SBA3, but it does work. So it is shortened, and it's running an H2. I've had no issues with that, like I said earlier, with supersonic, subsonics of any loading, suppressed and unsuppressed. I've had no issues with it. Typically, you know, if you go with a more undergassed rifle, something like a carbine is going to do just fine. If you're shooting, you know, unsuppressed a lot, you know, just something like a standard, you know, 9-inch truck gun or something like that, you're going to be shooting unsuppressed. Something like a carbine or H1 will do fine. If you're shooting suppressed with very high pressure rounds, trying to get the most of it, an H2 or H3 is probably going to do well. I like to keep just at least one extra carbine, one extra H2, just to kind of test rifles, test that recoil impulse. And that's going to be more touch and go, just depending on your rifle. Just see what other people are running, kind of thing. But like I said, 8-inch with a pistol gas port or pistol length gas system. I don't know what gas port CMMG is using, but man, it's been soft shooting and very reliable, which is a good combination to get suppressed and unsuppressed. So when I think this is prudent, so 300 blackout, it really excels as a bag gun. You know, something where you're going to put a Law Tactical folder. It's going to be ultra compact and just keep that suppressor, you know, in a side pocket or something like that zipped up. It's going to excel in home defense, which is, you know, what I have this set up to do. You know, even, you know, fully extended with this UCIW thing, buffer tube, and this 7-inch suppressor. This is still about like an M4 with the stock partially, you know, opened. As long as you're not doing body armor or anything, you're going to be able to get this, you know, super comfortable. Even if you do body armor, just collapse it a little bit. It'll stick off your pads and whatnot in case you're that high-speed person that keeps a plate carrier next to their bed. Ultra compact, good weapon light. It's not going to destroy my ears inside. With supersonics, it will be uncomfortable, which is why, you know, there are some people that want to use subsonics. I would just say choose a good loading with that. This is going to be a pretty good hunting rifle. I've yet to take in anything with it. Just the stands that I've been in, I've had more luck with the 5.56 at some of the longer range stands, you know, 100 to 200 yard shots. But I do take this in the woods. Hopefully I'll get some data about that using these 110 grains to try to take some whitetail this upcoming fall. But it has been a great rifle so far. You know, this could be a good truck gun. I don't like using a suppressor for a truck gun, so it's just not something I've done. But, you know, if you want to go with a 9 or 10.5 inch unsuppressed, something like that for a truck gun, it'll do great. I hope this helped. I hope if you were, you know, stumped on your 300 blackout build or debating on building one, this kind of gave you some ideas. It's going to be a lot more expensive than 5.56. Even if you get a good deal, you know, I got this Ammo Inc. 110 grain Hornady VMAX loading for 85 cents a round, which is pretty reasonable for what it is. But I only got a few boxes just to test it out, and then I was going to go back and purchase more, and they're all sold out, and I haven't seen anything since. So pretty much my only comparable loading is going to be, you know, probably $1.50 a round. Whereas 5.56, you know, you can shoot for 45 to 60 cents a round right now, even during, you know, 2022, you know, Russia, Ukraine madness, everything. You can still get 5.56 or 223 for, you know, 45 to 65 cents a round, depending on the loading that you like. Even some of the premium like 75 grains are still 75 cents a round, which is pretty reasonable. I do like using soft points if I'm going to go hunting. I think that's what I'm going to try out this entire fall. Some of that PMC 55 grain soft points, 65 cents a round. So 5.56, a lot cheaper to get into, a lot cheaper of a range build just to get some practice in. I hardly ever shoot this thing. I've put a few hundred rounds through it. I have tested various loadings just to make sure it's reliable with different pressure rounds. But as far as taking this out to 250 yards, testing my holdovers, confirmation 0 at distance, I haven't really done it. I've done chronoing, I've done some shooting drills, I've made sure, hey, does this charging handle work good with all this back pressure kind of stuff? A few hundred rounds through it. I think I've got the concept down. I've done enough dry fire that I know, hey, this is pretty stout for home defense, and I've shot it enough to where I trust it for home defense, defensive use kind of stuff. But really, if you're going for your first AR-15, I'd probably recommend something more like a general purpose 5.56. You could go just a basic 10.5 from Palmetto State and just throw on a red dot, practice with it, and then slowly build something a little nicer. Or if you want to save up and build something nice for your first build, that's definitely no regrets. But like I said, I hope this video helped if you're debating 300 Blackout, debating getting into it. If you're debating on getting into the NFA game, definitely suppressors are awesome, and the more people that have them, ultimately the harder it is going to be to ban them. The more people that there's going to be to stick up and say, well, hey, no, I know my brother owns that and he's not crazy, so I guess normal people can own this sort of stuff. So definitely get into the NFA. I hate the ATF. I think that's a good note to end. Just let the ATF know that you hate them. They have off-color, very, very poor taste posts on Instagram, and they don't block comments. So please follow the ATF HQ on Instagram and let them know how much you love them. Have a good one, and build a 300 Blackout.
Mr. Madison, what you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.